Hey everyone, this is Eric, and before we get to this week's episode of The Living Force, we wanted to send a congratulations to Alexander Freed and Del Rey on the release of Alphabet Squadron, which released this week. We'll be reviewing the book on Utini in full next week, and we'll be discussing the book on the podcast in detail later on in the month, but we didn't want to go into any spoilers or plot just yet. And now, on with the show.
Hi, this is Timothy Zahn, author of Star Wars Thrawn. You're listening to the Living Force podcast.
Welcome to the Living Force podcast.
Permission to jump in her next swing and blow something up?
A Utini production.
Darkness rises and light to meet it.
Episode 8, a conversation with Dooku Jedi Lost author Cavan Scott.
We need your help.
And now, here are your hosts.
Who are you?
Dr. Corey Helton.
So good to have you back.
Eric Eilerson.
Do you have something, a cowl or something you can put on?
And Dr. Charles Hankel.
I've seen your daily routine. You're not busy.
What are you drinking, Eric?
Miller High Life.
Oh, God.
Miller Low Life is what I call those.
Well, it's a champagne of beers. No, because like last night,
What's
so I've been drinking Oberon.
What's the container that it's
Oh, it's a koozie.
Oh,
I got when I was in
it
Alabama.
looks like a small bottle of champagne.
Champagne of beers. There you go.
Yeah.
No, last night we were, me and my buddies watched the first Fast and Furious movie,
Oh, God.
which was phenomenal. And I love those new ones. I've only seen 5 through 8, so now I went back and it was a lot of fun.
That's
But
nice.
I've been drinking Oberon up here, which is like my favorite craft beer, but it's like, you know, $12, $13 a 6-pack. And I'm like, well, I'm not making enough money for this to be sustainable. So I'm like, hey buddy, can you just go out to the store, give me a cheap beer? He's like, cool. Got me this, it was $5 for 6. I'm like, that's way better.
Nice. Yeah. Miller Lite's my go-to cheap beer. I like Miller Lite.
I'm usually PBR myself, but that's like,
It used to be PBR, but I don't know. Something about it I don't like anymore. I don't know.
I mean,
It's changed.
this isn't terrible.
Have you got to get the Natty Light, the lemonade stuff.
You're right.
I
guys
saw in the
gotta-
store today.
You guys got to buy some of that shit, man. It's so delicious.
Oh my god, I forgot. How did I forget the name?
What store did you see that in, Charles? Is it a Walmart?
It was a Food Line.
A Food Lion. Okay, so
Yeah.
I thought that only Walmart was carrying it. Maybe Food Lion's got it too. Stuff is so good, man.
Dude, Food Line sounds like a fake grocery store from a movie. Oh, let's go to the Food Line.
It's great, man. I love Food Line because we live super close to like a Trader Joe's and a Harris Teeter, and it's like twice as expensive.
Yeah,
So-
and Trader Joe's is like the cheapest in Chicago too. So I'm like, ugh, I miss cheap stuff. What's nice about being here in like West Backwoods, Michigan for the summer? Like I got 18 eggs for like 80 cents. And I was like, all right, there we go. Gas was like $2.70.
Yeah, we filled up at Aldi last week, and I don't usually. I've never lived close to an Aldi, and I was like, this is gonna be $150. It was like $98. I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah, my
Amazing.
mom swears by Aldi, man.
It's like 30% cheaper than everywhere else. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I'll be breaking out the beers later. This is like Charlotte. I found out is like I kind of knew this already, but it's like brewery galore. Like there's
Really?
so many local breweries. There's like a whole neighborhood
Wow.
here that's like literally just breweries like all over the place. There's like several
That's awesome.
that like are all in like one giant warehouse. Like they share the warehouse where I guess they actually do all the fermenting and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just like walk between them. So I need to try a bunch of these.
Yeah, I
the
love
next
breweries. It's like one of my favorite pastime. I think we have like 5 or 6. So
Yeah, we had like a handful in Columbia, but there's definitely a lot more here. And it's nice too because our dog is like so high energy because he's a golden that we can take him out with us to do
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So
dude, there was a super controversial post on Reddit and like one of the beer communities about like, is it okay to take your kids to breweries? And it was like a super heated debate because there's so many stories of people having awful experiences. I went to a brewery about 2 months ago, and my buddy got hit in the face with a beanbag that a kid threw. So I understand their hesitancy.
So the argument was don't bring your kids because they'll hurt other people.
Because people, I guess the parents go and they drink and then they just get too crazy. Like the kids just run around and do whatever they want. And like
Yeah.
people that don't have kids, it kind of gets on their nerves. I
Yeah.
guess.
Well,
Yeah.
when I was in
I guess the
Alabama, I
same-
went to a bunch of breweries and there were kids around, but I'm like, these kids have probably been at these breweries since they were 5. Like, they run this
Yeah.
place.
It was an interesting debate to see both sides of it. So
Yeah. The same thing could happen with your dog, though. So
that's true. In fact, that was a sub. That's why I brought it up. There was a sort of a sub discussion about is it okay to bring your dog, and I think the answer essentially is you can control them and they're fairly well behaved.
sure.
Yeah. I'd love to bring my dog anywhere that I can, frankly. He'll just sit on a chair and go to sleep.
Yeah.
And with that, we can officially say welcome to the audience for episode 8, The Last Jedi of the Living Force podcast. My name is Eric, one of your co-hosts, and I am joined today by some amazing friends. First of all, Dr. Corey Helton. How you doing, my friend?
I am fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Of course, thanks for always coming on like you do most weeks. And Dr. Charles Henkel. What's up, dude?
Hey, man, just hanging out. Happy to be here as always.
All right, yes, you have a perfect attendance record. Thank you for that.
Since elementary school.
And with us today is a very special guest, Mr. Cavan Scott. Welcome.
Hello there.
Yeah, we have been trying to get Cavan on here for a bit, and we're so glad that we finally got to make it happen to talk about all things Dooku, all things Star Wars, and all things writing. So thanks again.
No worries at all.
Now, for those of you in our audience that may not know Kevin's work, you haven't listened to our past 2 episodes, but also Cavan has written a ridiculous amount of Star Wars stories, including a bunch of choose-your-own-adventure novels, Adventures in Wild Space, Star Wars Adventure comics over at IDW, the Tales from Vader's Castle series specifically. He's a member of the illustrious Project Luminous crew, and of course, the author of the first canonical Star Wars audio drama, Dooku Jedi Lost. Now, Corey and Charles, I know we've all talked about Dooku Jedi Lost. Have you guys dipped into the comic work a bunch of Kevin's at all? I've read a couple of his Adventures issues.
Yeah, the Tales from Vader's Castle is what I'm most familiar with outside of this Dooku Jedi Lost audio drama, and that was a really fun bit, just very different than anything else that we've seen. Kind of almost in that Death Troopers vein, if you will, just the kind of creepy, almost horror Star Wars.
I am not nearly as caught up with the comics, but I have seen those Adventures in Wild Space. I've flipped them. I haven't read the whole things, but I've seen them a bunch of times. They have some of the prettiest covers, I think, of any of the young readers sort of stuff. So those look really, really fun. I've been meaning to pick them up.
That's kind of a background on Cavan, and I kind of want to jump right into questions, guys. We have a number of questions here that we want to ask, and you'll hear a lot less of our voices, we promise, in a second. So, Corey, if you want to go to our list and just start us off.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kevin, thanks again for coming on the show. We have lots of great questions for you. It was fun getting sort of pre-approved questions, going through the various process you have to go through to get certain things approved. So we'll try to stick to the script the best we can, but we'll see how that goes. The first really general question, I'm sure you get asked this a lot. How old were you when you first discovered Star Wars? Like, kind of what's your first experience with this fantastic universe, and how did you transition from kind of being a fan to getting into writing projects?
Sure, yeah. So my first experience was the original Marvel comic run. So before I saw the films, I was a little bit too young to see Star Wars, and I knew Empire Strikes Back was coming. And then over in the UK, we had Star Wars Weekly, which was a weekly comic which reprinted the old Marvel run. It was the new Marvel run at that point. And in the back, it had like Marvel backup strips, so like Star-Lord and things like that, which obviously for the Guardians of the Galaxy fans today is quite a familiar name. So that was my first experience. So it was through the comics primarily, and then I saw Empire, and I remember getting an Obi-Wan Kenobi figure from my gran, not knowing who Obi-Wan Kenobi was, and thinking I've just got a doll of an old man. Thanks for that, Gran. And he's got a funny sword thing. This is odd. And then obviously realised who that was, and he became one of my favourite characters. So yeah, it was a weird drip feeding in. I mean, I was very aware. I think everyone was aware in the late 70s what it was. But I think I knew it more from photos than because I hadn't seen Star Wars, and there was no way of seeing Star Wars either, unless they re-showed it at the cinema, which they didn't. Wow. So I think if my memory serves, I saw Empire at the cinema, I saw Return at the cinema, and I saw Star Wars on TV. because when it was on British television, there was a special special celebratory magazine with the Radio Times, which is our sort of TV guide, did a special. It's finally on, which I remember. I remember
That's amazing.
This issue because it had pages and pages and pages of pictures. So yeah, that was my beginning. How then sort of fast forward, well, many years later, I've been working in licensed TV, comics and books for a long time. Growing up in the UK, basically your two things you had was Star Wars and Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And primarily I was known as the Doctor Who writer over here. I've been writing Doctor Who for nearly 20 years now. So long before the show came back in 2005, I was writing Doctor Who. And because of my work on that and various other franchises, the call came through, would I be interested in working on this Adventures in Wild Space series, which they were putting together for the UK market, which was a series of kids' books. And because I'd had some experience in doing children's books, they came to me and asked me if I'd like to put an audition piece for it, and obviously I jumped at the chance. And that started it off. And so that initial Adventures in Wild Space special book that I did was the sort of the beginning of pretty much a full-time job now. Star Wars dominates just about everything I do at the minute, which is no bad thing. I do say my to-do list is the same now as it was when I was 10.
Absolutely.
I can dedicate more time to Star Wars than I could when I was at school. So it's pretty much I'm full-time on Star Wars at the minute.
That's amazing. Fantastic. Yeah, join the club, man. We're all kind of in the same boat. Charles and I are both physicians by day, and we have somehow found time to do Star Wars every minute of every spare minute we have. So,
and I will say that you're speaking to at least a couple of Whovians as well. Yeah. So we have a great appreciation for all your work, even outside of Star Wars.
Oh, that's good, man.
Those original Marvel comics are super interesting. I have issues 13, 14, and 15, I think, like in mint edition hanging on the wall. Like I just moved to my house, so I'm not in here yet, but those are really cool. They're like, it looks like the old like He-Man cartoons. I'm not sure if you guys had that in the UK. Like it's
no, absolutely.
Yeah, it's very stylized. It almost doesn't look Star Wars. It's very interesting. So
I've still got a lot of the weeklies, but they're very battered and falling to bits. And at some point in my life, I took a pair of scissors in them to make a scrapbook. So there's holes in them. Then when Marvel brought out the big omnibuses, I went and rebought them all again, spending far too much money. So they're all sat behind me now on the shelf.
Nice.
And now that's the same series that was continued with Marvel 108 a couple weeks ago, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Wow. Really? Is that how that worked? I didn't realize that was the continuation that they did.
Yeah. So that's an extra issue, a new lost issue of the original Marvel run.
That's fantastic.
And I can only imagine for someone that was so formed by those comics, like hearing that, hey, by the way, that comic from your childhood, we're gonna make one more issue. Must have been kind of insane for you.
It was incredible. There's been two things that have been the hangover from that time. Was that that was happening, and I knew it was going on, and I couldn't mention it to anyone. Right. And also when I got the email saying, "How would you like to bring Jackson back?" And for me, Jackson the Rabbit, who was obviously a big part of that series, even though he was very quickly axed when George Lucas saw him.
Like Green Rabbit? Maybe not.
Yeah, he was in the first comic I ever read. So for when I saw Empire Strikes Back, I was very upset he wasn't a character. For me, he was just as much. I didn't know the difference between the iconic group and the new characters that Marvel created, because they're treated the same in the comic. So as soon as I started writing Star Wars, I kept saying, "Can we put Jackson in this? Can we put Jackson? What about Jackson?" And they sort of look at me and shake their heads and say, "Move on." They finally gave in, and so so we brought him back a couple of years ago in IDW.
That's fantastic.
And that is mad for me, that the fact that I don't know how many 30 odd years later I'm sitting writing the same.
That's amazing. What a beautiful circle to sort of circle back.
I know. And for me, it's really important with doing the Star Wars adventure stuff and the Vader's Castle that they are supposed to be all ages. And people call them kids comics. We try and make sure they're not they're not talking down. They're something that anyone can read. But just like those original Marvel run, anyone could pick those up and enjoy them. And that's what we've been trying to do. So it's completely full circle. And I'm hoping, obviously, that perhaps a kid will be picking up Adventures and sort of going, well, this is the first time I've really they're bound to know something else about Star Wars, but hopefully that could be the thing that would really grab them and pull them in. So that's what we're really hoping with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of on that same note, I'm going to adjust our second question here just a smidge. You say that all the characters like Jackson and Luke were kind of both in the same world for you as a kid. Do you remember, was there a moment when you realized, okay, this is the expanded universe and this is the canon? And did that affect you as a kid, or did you kind of always let them mix?
Not as a kid, no. I think in my head they were always there. And also, with me being me, I also then created my own characters, and in my head they were just as important as any of them. And
Oh, yeah.
and the same way with my other obsession when I was a kid with Doctor Who, we had the Doctor Who weekly comic, and then the Doctor Who monthly. And so again, the Doctor's companions in those, because they weren't the same companions on the telly, they were just as real to me as the ones I saw on telly, because actually I probably spent more time with them because I read them and reread them and reread them, whereas I only got to see the television program once and then it was gone. So the same with the films for Star Wars. I saw Empire Strikes Back, and then it was years until I saw it again. I relived it through the novels and the records and all that kind of thing. Those Marvel comics never went away. They were always in my room. So if I wanted Star Wars, I reached for them. And so, yeah, those comics were just as important for me.
That's been interesting now with some people with things like the current comics or Clone Wars or stuff like that. Like, people have love for these characters that actually have way more hours of content than just the film characters. I think that's been an interesting continuation of that.
Yeah, when you think, all that stuff was happening, that explosion of new content, and especially after the first film, that's all they had to go on. And it's crazy to think of that now. After, I've come to write in Star Wars after there's been an entire expanded universe, which is, then been put into Legends, and now we've got a new universe. But I've got, all that to play with. These people were starting out from scratch, and all they had was a couple of hours of movie and no real idea what was happening next. So, and then they would have seen the holiday special and gone, okay.
I guess this is going. And hence Jackson the Rabbit was born.
Yeah. And, you do sit there and go, yeah, no Jackson, but we'll allow Chewbacca's dad.
Yeah.
So, you can sort of see how they went from looking at Star Wars and going, right, well, obviously what we're going to have is a giant green bunny. And a few years later, there was a giant squid man in charge of a spaceship. So it's not too far away, And also, but I think what they really instilled on me then was the fun element of Star Wars, because those Marvel comics are all about fun. They're about melodrama, they're about action, they're about fun, they're about the character interactions. Yeah, they might not be exactly what we now know for the characters, but it's informed really what I want to do with Star Wars in a lot of my work, because it's that thing of remembering this is adventure, especially for the kids stuff. I mean, when you're doing adult stuff, you can be a little bit more, you can take a step back. But when you're dealing with kids, you just want to keep them turning the pages and throwing more and more things at the heroes. You could say a lot of things about that Marvel run, but they definitely played up the adventure left, right, and center.
Oh yeah, I mean, when people are saying, Star Wars isn't that silly or anything, I'm like, well, when the little green Muppet was talking to the guy about how to do backflips and lift rocks, I didn't think that was super serious when I was a kid. So here we are.
And there's a quote from Doctor Who that I always use for most of my life, which is, what's the point of growing up if you can't be childish every now and then? And I think that's something that we can all remember. It doesn't mean you can't be serious with Star Wars. Of course you can be serious with Star Wars. But at the same time, you've got to remember that what you are watching and what you are getting excited about is a bunch of people playing on screen. And I think sometimes you have to sort of play along.
Yeah, well, Cavan, you're clearly incredibly creative. Just talking about some of your inspirations from when you were a kid, I see exactly why. But when we're talking about what you've done recently with Dooku Jedi Lost, how did the idea for that story first come about? I think we all read it and loved it, but realized it was a story that we had never necessarily known that we wanted. And now that we have it, we're really glad that we do.
Yeah, to be honest, I wasn't even sure it was a story I wanted to tell or needed to tell. It was they came to me to ask if I would be interested, because I have a history that when I said I've been writing Doctor Who, I started writing Doctor Who for audio drama, because at one point that was all there really was. There was books and there was audio dramas, and that was my first sort of foray into writing fiction. So because I've got that history, and we have a big tradition in the UK of audio drama. We've still got a national radio station that publishes a play in the afternoon every day. We've got a soap opera just on radio, which has been going for something like 60 years, So, and I remember listening to a load of sort of the old time radio from the States with things like The Shadow and Superman and Sherlock Holmes, and loving that as well. So I talked to people at Del Rey about this. I talked to people Lucasfilm about this. So when they were planning this sort of this rebirth of sort of Star Wars audio dramas, they came to me because I'd had experience in it. They also knew that I loved Christopher Lee, not necessarily so much that I love Dooku, but I love, Christopher Lee. So I've watched a lot of Christopher. Yeah. So they came to, and I must admit, it was a case of I opened up the email, and this is going to sound incredibly. This is going to sound like a humble brag, and it's not supposed to be. But I was just leaving Skywalker Ranch after the first Project Luminous trip, and what was happening was not even a humble brag in it. That's just a brag.
No, it's amazing. Own it, man.
So,
we love it.
So what happened was we were all leaving after the first week we were there, and we had this big joke that I was going to be the last one to go because my plane was later to leave to the UK. So you stay in this glorious sort of inn, this sort of guest house on the ranch, and I was waving Charles and Claudia and everyone off as if, I'm going to stay here. It's a big sort of like, come back now. And I sat there, and there's a little rocking chair, and it was something like a little house on the prairie. I sat on this rocking chair going, I've got a good hour, so I'm going to read the book, and then I looked at my phone, and it was an email that Mike Seglain at Lucasfilm had teased me that something I would probably get an email, and I didn't even twig what it was going to be about. And they literally waited for the moment I was on my own there to come and say, do you want to do this Dooku thing? And I sat there going, I've never thought about writing Dooku ever, because for me, he's just a character who's there in Star Wars. He turns up and then he goes again, and he goes in a way that is important, and he's obviously very important for the story, but I've never really thought about it that much. And they gave me a little list of things that, here's some things you could do with it, here's some things you might want to, an area you might want to take it in. And the more I read the brief, the more I was thinking, actually, no, there is a story here I could tell. And I signed up for it, and even then I still really wasn't sure who Dooku was in my story. And so it was quite a quick process then to actually get to the point when we could write it. And there was a lot of conversations, and that's when it all started to crystallize. So Dooku went from a character that I appreciated because he was played by Christopher Lee to a character that I've appreciated a lot more because we've examined him a lot more now, and hopefully a lot of other people feel that way after listening to it. Again, people seem shocked by it. It was that thing that we could announce something and then get it out within 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whenever it was. It was a surprise, which is because just how audio drama works. You don't have long lead times, so you announced it. By the time it was announced, it was being recorded, I think. So yeah, people were shocked, but then what I loved about it was the fact that most people then seemed to turn around and go, okay, then let's see what we've got. And then as soon as we said we were using Ventress as well, that's when I think people became really excited as well, because Ventress as a character has been loved from Clone Wars and Dark Disciple as well. And of course from the comics, which I remember Ventress from reading the old Dark Horse comics. So yeah, so it was a strange process of developing that story, because as I said, I didn't even know it was a story I hadn't spent much time thinking about it. But now I'm really glad that it was a story I got to tell.
Sure. Was it planned to be an audio drama from the start?
Yes. Yeah, that was one of the reasons they asked me, because I had that history in audio drama.
Yeah. We were saying it was fascinating with the audio drama format, because as we were all listening to it, we were chatting back and forth, and the amount of care you were able to put into the character, like you're saying, someone that a lot of us didn't have a whole lot of familiarity with, and he served a purpose, but this medium allowed it to really be a character study, which was interesting, because I feel like we haven't seen that before a lot. We've seen plot-driven stories, we've seen character-driven stories, but really a study into someone's psyche over their life. It seems like, to those of us that aren't as familiar with audio dramas, as either you or people in the UK, it seems like, this is the natural medium for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really interesting to really try and get into someone's home. Again, one of the things they didn't specifically ask for it, but they were like, we want to cover his entire life from his childhood all the way through. And at first I didn't think anything of that until I realized that he's in his 60s when he leaves the Jedi. So that's a lot of life to cover,
Yeah, it really is.
and then when I said yes, I didn't really know at that point as well that there was another Padawan as well that we were inserting into the story. So again, there was another element of his life that we didn't know. And I think that's what actually made it quite exciting, because it was a bit of a blank canvas. Even in the old EU, there wasn't a huge amount about him before. There was quite a lot of him during, and his motivations during, but you never saw him as a Jedi, really. And that was the interesting thing. And I must admit, when they first put it to me and said, we're not talking about Dooku the Sith here, we're talking about Dooku the Jedi, I was like, oh, really? Right. Because obviously I want to write a Sith, and I want to write him being nasty, horrible. Right. But then actually, you start thinking, well, Dooku, if he was a Jedi for that long, and they're properly shocked when he leaves.
Yeah,
And
sure.
they still don't know why. He's obviously a well-respected Jedi. He's obviously a very successful Jedi because he's trained these wonderful Jedi. He's had a history there. He was Yoda's Padawan. He's going to be special.
Yeah.
And then when you start thinking about it, you're going, yeah, this is an interesting man because he has to. And also, you can't just make him Anakin 2.0. There has to be a different path for him to go there.
Sure. Yeah, we talked about that a great deal in our 2-part series about Dooku Jedi Lost. About like we didn't know that we needed a Dooku book, but we definitely did. And we feel like we've talked about that a great deal at Utini. Is that these two stories, both Master and Apprentice and Dooku Jedi Lost, is to us like the epitome of what the expanded universe should be. It should expand on stuff that we don't know we needed, and it was really beautiful to both get fantastic backstory on Qui-Gon with Master and Apprentice, and then Dooku like right back to back. It was very beautiful the way that they were linking those two stories. Felt like it was part of the same story. It was done really, really well.
Excellent. Well, yeah, because the thing is, I was already working with Claudia on Project Luminous as well, so there was, very good planning on Lucasfilm part that we could start. We'd had that relationship starting with Luminous, so we could start throwing stuff back and forth. And there was stuff that Claudia couldn't do in Master and Apprentice that she still wanted out there, and the stuff I couldn't do in Dooku Lost, Jedi Lost, sorry, that I couldn't get in there. So we were able to swap some things as well. So yeah, it was definitely we were writing at the same time, so it was definitely a period of swapping ideas, and also just trying to get through some of the nitty gritty of like, well, when would this happen? When would that happen? How would they react? And so yeah, it's so nice to have someone else out there writing something that you're involved with. So usually you're on your own, and obviously it's a collaborative process. You have your editors, you have story group, you have all that, but actually a writer's perspective is different. And so there was a few knotty little problems that we could sort of ease out between us with lots of messages flying back and forth.
You mentioned that that's not very common necessarily to have someone writing a story that you guys can bounce ideas off one another. But what about other authors who are in the Star Wars community? Do you feel like you can speak with them about something that you're writing at any given point, even if they're not writing something at the same time that has direct links to what you're working on?
Yeah, we do, and we do swap stories, but then quite often, even within the other writing communities, you don't necessarily know what people know about what's going on, so you have to be a little bit careful because it's obviously there is so much secrecy around every Star Wars project that you don't want to put anyone in an awkward position. But there are general things that we talk about, and theories that we come up with that then you can bounce in. But this was slightly different, and it was linked into the other stuff we're doing as well. So we already had that conversation going, which was slightly different. But yeah, the community is brilliant at the minute with the writing community with Star Wars. I think a lot of it has come from from a certain point of view book. Because the experience, even though we all wrote those stories separately, and it's funny because a lot of people think that Claudia and I worked together on that as well because of the Force. That was nothing to do with us. And so, but what happened was the launch of that book, when we had that sort of like the media thing about Operation Blue Milk and all that, that started to create a little buzz within the group of writers as well. And then we did the launch at New York Comic Con where for the first time a lot of us were in the same room together signing books for hours, and so it really cemented the group of people who are writing canon books and comics at the minute, because while a lot of us knew each other individually, we didn't really know each other as a whole. So I think that book has been very important about making the canon feel more cohesive because now we all know each other better.
Right. And did you find that with this specific project, speaking of all that collaboration, there was something different in collaborating either with the actors that were doing it, because it was more like a play coming together, I suppose? Or I guess you with audio dramas have experience with that. Is it different with people that are slightly different artists than a group of people that are all writers?
Well, you know that when you, because obviously the script still comes first with this, and so you know there's going to be a extra interpretation, I think. So you quite often you leave aspects of it open to interpretation by the actors as well. So you can obviously suggest what you think, how you think a line should be said, or right. What the character's feeling at the point. But then you're not there when it's been recorded, and you're not the director and you're not the actor. And I've produced audio drama as well, so I've sat in that room and I've seen what it's like when a script comes in, and the actors are sort of puzzling over a piece, and between you in the room, you have to say, well, what did the writer think? What do we think? And you try and mesh that together, and you get the final performance. And so it is incredibly collaborative because of that. And I love that. And I love the fact, just like when I'm working with artists on comics, you send this thing off into the world. And I always say with comics, something that Neil Gaiman said that I really believe, that when you're writing a script for a comic, you're not writing for the person who's going to go into a comic store and picking it up. You're writing it for the artist who's going to be the one who interpret the work so that people can pick it up. So that's true, and that's totally changed. When I read that from Neil, it's changed how I write scripts. So I quite often talk to the artist in the script saying, this is what I'm thinking, but what do you think? And a dialogue starts. And I think the best work in comics has that element to it. And so it's a very similar medium for me, both script writing and comic script writing, because it's not just your story. When you're writing prose, that's pretty much your story, and the editor and the people along below. But it's quite a pure vision to you. When you're writing anything that's collaborative, you've got to be able to compromise. You've got to be able to bend a bit, because then the best things happen, because someone else will bring something to it that you've never even thought of. And that's why I love it.
It seems like we all have this misconception in our heads of writers, being alone in a dark room with a single lamp writing out a book. It's really kind of, yeah, exactly. But it's kind of cool to hear you talk about how collaborative it really is now. I mean, especially with Star Wars, but with all of these ways that you can kind of make the world a little bigger for something that probably for most of its history has been incredibly solitary.
Yeah, and the social media in all its forms has its own evils, but it also has a lot of benefits. And so writing, I wasn't a full-time writer all my way through. I've written all my career. I was a magazine writer first and a magazine editor, but you still went in and you had a team and you still worked with people, and you still had the moment when you went up and went to the water cooler and you had a chat, and you had all those moments. Mm-hmm. Writers can get that now through instant messaging and Slack groups and all those kind of things. And there's a network now, and it's up to you how much you want to be involved. And it can be incredibly, like any work environment, it could be incredibly distracting, and sometimes you have to turn it off. But there is that element, I think, now within the writing community it is a proper community, and people understand. Whereas before, and there are certain elements of people who like that idea of a troubled writer sitting on their own,
Sure.
With a bottle of whiskey right beside them. Obviously, I have that. But yeah, if you want it, there is a chance to have. Say within Star Wars, we've definitely got that at the minute.
That's fantastic. So you talked a little bit about you felt like it was sort of difficult to write Dooku from like a long gap in his his lifetime, basically up to when we see him in the films. Is there a particular life point or age that you found particularly fun to write, or was kind of your favorite?
I loved writing young Dooku, because that was just, again, you don't get to see. It was fun writing kids for a non-kids thing. So I spent so much time writing child characters, but actually it was writing something that adults would be listening to, and you have to approach children differently that way. And we haven't really seen since the days of the EU, Jedi Academy and that kind of thing. Jedi Academy, Jedi, the training thing.
Sure.
So it was good to go back and delve into that thing. And also we spend a lot of time with Padawans, and we don't spend a lot of time with younglings and initiates. Right. So it was take that step further and go, actually, imagine what that was like. And people say, oh, there's a certain Harry Potter-esque vibe to a lot of the early stuff in Dooku, Jedi Lost, but that's because basically it's a boarding school. Right. I mean, that's what
absolutely, yeah.
And it's a forced boarding school as well. You've got no choice. Right. So that was quite interesting. And then the flip side of that was, as soon as he was getting, nearer the Dooku that we know, that was really interesting, because again, I didn't want him to be just a moustache stroking, twirling villain. He had to have a real reason to think that he was doing the right thing. And sort of dealing with someone that is quite remote and is quite shut down in a lot of ways in his emotions, but obviously having these relationships with these equivalent to sons in his life who are now going off and and exploring and their own existence in Rael and Qui-Gon. That was a really interesting thing, because for all the time when we talk about Jedi not having attachments, they've all got attachments.
It's all lies.
Yeah,
that's the biggest struggle in for them. And I find I've got this fascination of people who live a monastic life and say, to serve people we're going to shut ourselves off. It's just it's crazy to me, but it's really interesting to explore. And so I loved writing that sort of the last sort of, I think probably third, when Dooku was slowly drifting away and not really realizing he was. And I think a lot of it as well came with conversations, again, talking about the collaborative nature, talking with Elizabeth, the editor, and wonderful editor, Del Rey, who really helped me nail the fact that Dooku, all the way through his life, knows he's the best. And that informs just about everything he says and everything he believes. And it doesn't mean he's a bad person. He just knows that he's excelling and he could excel more. And that's why then I think the relationship between him and Cypher Dyess became so interesting, because you've got that person who will try and pop the balloon and sort of like remind him, center him again. And as soon as that's gone as well, that's another relationship that's gone. As soon as Dooku loses these, either a friend or someone he's treating as a son or a student, he starts to unravel. And so they were really interesting times to play with.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, we talked about that exact period when we were listening, because we realized we don't get those moments like with Anakin. Like when we don't know what was his best friend's name, none of that stuff. So seeing Dooku and Cypher Dyess especially, I know it was one of my favorite parts, seeing them kind of, again, to do the Harry Potter comparison you said, like the Harry Ron-ness of it.
Yeah.
Being like, you're exceptional, but okay, let's still just hang out. Let's still calm down.
And they're competitive, and they have very un-Jedi-like tendencies. Like they get mad at each other, and they do stuff that we would, if we saw in films, we would probably say, wow, that's not very Jedi at all. But they're kids, so they get a pass.
Yeah, exactly. And you got to remember, a Jedi is an ideal. And Luke, through most of his very odd Jedi training, I don't think he doesn't really get it until the end. And so it's this is if you come back to the idea that they're supposed to be warrior monks, or their entire life is sort of trying to get to enlightenment, and it can't happen straight away, because otherwise everyone would be able to do it. So it was really important for me, and it's been important with the kids stuff I've done with having families in it, that when I was writing Adventures in Wild Space, I wanted the two children to feel like siblings who argued and didn't always get on, but would also be there for each other's back when they really needed to, because, hey, he's my brother, he's annoying, but he's my brother. And again, having that aspect in friendship, which is there in Star Wars, it's there all the way through. I mean, Luke and Han, I think, have that, but we never really see that close thing of people who spend decades together. And dealing with them, once you get into that kind of time frame, you can deal with the fact that you have anxiety when the person leaves your life as well, or you move on from leave someone behind. One of the great fandoms in the world, and the great series in the world I love is Star Trek. I never liked the fact that the Enterprise crew just largely went through life together, because that wouldn't happen. They're career military career people, they would move on and do other things. And then finally, when Sulu left, you go, yes, someone's got a ship. And the best bits for me, again, it was growing up in the 80s, so the movies were incredibly important to me for Star Trek, is the fact that when you sort of see Star Trek 2, which we actually watched on our last trip to the ranch together, because it's got so many good relationships in it.
Wow.
And so the scenes when you've got Bones going to see, Kirk, who's feeling like he's old and that kind of thing. Again, there's old friends who don't spend a lot of time together anymore. And I love those kind of relationships, because that's when you get some really interesting character stuff.
Well, I think that's what was really cool about like you and Claudia both using Rail as that kind of binding force, that we get to see him meet Qui-Gon and have that kind of relationship. And then when you're reading Master and Apprentice, you're realizing, oh, this is people that haven't seen each other in a while, but had this unbreakable bond that if you weren't there, you can't quite get it, but they do.
Yeah. And very importantly, we haven't seen his Padawanship. No, and that's a very definite choice. Because, we don't want to tell the entire story all in one go. Because also you'd be sitting there listening to an audio drama for 3 years. But, that again for me is a fascinating story. We saw him in the early days of the Qui-Gon training, but what must have been like for Dooku to have to cope with this Avros guy, because they are so. And so that was a very definite decision that we wouldn't really focus on that yet.
Right. Now, while we may not want a 3-year continuous audio drama,
I do. I mean, speak for yourself.
Sure. Maybe we'll get some breaks in between because so there's been a super warm reception to Dooku
Yes.
throughout, which is I've assumed been great. But would you, based on that, want to continue this particular Dooku series in audio drama format? Is there another character you'd love to give this specific treatment to? Because now it feels like this community is finally understanding something that you've known for years, that this works.
Oh, there's so many. I mean, you can obviously I'd like to see something like the X-Wing series, but in audio form. I think with audio you can get the entire thing of a little mini series focusing on a group of people as well. And I'd love to work. I mean, this is completely me just putting together a wish list.
Right.
But I'd love to do something like that. Obviously, you'd like to deal with some of the big characters, and it does give you a chance to deal with things. I mean, I'd love to do something like and it's been done a bit in the books, but something like Tarkin's rise to power, and sort of like almost like a House of Cards, but for Tarkin.
The villains and politics are always fun in Star Wars.
Yeah, exactly, and they sort of work on audio. That's the kind of thing that you can really get away with.
Yeah,
but I mean, there are so many. There's so many stories that you could tell in this media. Just as but I think with audio you can get really close to the characters. You can really have quite intimate moments, because you really believe, especially if you're listening on earphones, it's just you and them in the room. So how cool would it be to sort of have Leia and Han's a relationship following Ben's birth and that kind of thing in audio form, because you could really explore that familial relationship in audio.
Yeah, there is an element of that kind of intimacy and privacy with audio drama. I noticed when I was listening to this as I was walking my dog, I would sometimes look around and realize that no one else around me knows what's going on in my ears, but it's very intense.
Exactly. And no one really knows what you're doing when you're listening. You can obviously, if you've got a book in front of your hand, you're reading. Everyone gets that. But you can it's like one of the reasons I love it. And I think podcasts and everything have become so important to people because you have got that moment that you can just shut yourself off and totally lose yourself in the moment. So I think they're very important.
No doubt.
So I think with Project Luminous on the horizon, we would be remiss not to bring it up. And we are fully understanding of the fact that this is under wraps.
Yes.
Oh, speaking of wraps, the Balm of Luminous wraps in I lost word is interesting word choice. But so with that coming out, is there anything that you want to talk about regarding Project Luminous, or is there anything right now in Star Wars that you haven't been allowed to touch that you would love to sink your teeth into?
Like comics, novels aside,
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously there's a lot I'd like to say about Project Luminous.
Sure.
I can't say anything about Project Luminous.
Fair enough.
I realize how completely frustrating this must be that we are being the biggest teasers in the world and going.
We're pretty used to it at this point, honestly.
And it is going to be worth it. Trust me.
Awesome.
It's actually the nice thing about it is that at least we've got that sort of those two words that we can use to describe what we're doing.
Yeah.
The worst thing has been not being able to talk about any of it, and so to actually even have a shorthand that we can say, I know Charles does it on Twitter, and everyone, we're working on Project Luminous today. We don't have to say anything else. People just, one of the most annoying things about being a writer working on a property like Star Wars is the fact that you obviously spend time talking on Twitter and all these, and you have newsletters and you have websites, and you want to sort of be able to talk to the people who buy your stuff and read your stuff and listen to your stuff, and that's amazing. You want to give stuff back, but you can't actually say what you're doing at all. So I think sometimes when you're following writing, the most boring thing in the world was I was working on something today. You're told, tell people what you're doing. Well, I can't, can I?
I wrote some things down. Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. I typed on a keyboard. So at least, the fact that we now, between now and when things are announced, and I can't even say when that is, more and more things will be trickling out. And so, and it is very exciting for us, obviously, being in the circle at the minute, but also that it is going to be worth the wait. But what I will say is, again, that thing, you've got 5 writers who are working very collaboratively together from different backgrounds and different experiences. So again, there are things coming out of this that none of us would have done on our own or been able to think of. And so it's it's going to be great because you've got these 5 people working together. And yeah, I'm just very glad to be a part of it.
Now, we have a question that we started asking some people we have on that I want to throw your way, because you've been super open about your work and about your collaboration, and it all sounds really incredible. And at the end of the day, everyone putting their mark on Star Wars is probably going to have a legacy of some kind as how their work is remembered. If you got to choose, if you had your druthers, what would your legacy in Star Wars be? If we say Cavan Scott did this.
Well, that's a really tough one.
we decided to lowball you the whole time and then spring on you.
Oh God, it's really interesting. Well, obviously, you have problems. When people say, "What is the part of Star Wars you really want to write?" You don't want to say that, because if you say it out loud, someone else might do it first.
Exactly.
That is quite. But I suppose my legacy would be that I would want to have brought a new generation into fandom. And help them in. I'm not arrogant enough to think that I would be doing that. Star Wars would be doing that. But I would like to be the person who would perhaps facilitated, written these stories that getting kids to read Star Wars and start on that journey that I started on in the late 70s. And so for me, when I go to things like San Diego Comic Con and New York Comic Con, which I will be again this year, one of the best times for me is when I'm doing sign-ins on the IDW stand for Star Wars Adventures and Tales from Vader's Castle. And it's me and the other guys, it's Derek and Morissette, and we're all sitting there and we're chatting, and you get kids coming up with comics. And for me, that is the best thing. And you got kids who come out, and you can talk to who's your favorite character, all that kind of stuff that fans talk about when you see someone who else is a fan. And just seeing the fact that these are kids who are starting to get into it, and they're reading comics, which, we need more kids reading comics, otherwise there won't be anyone reading comics in 20 years' time. Yep. And, kids who are in that environment of all these different things that they can have a comic in their hand. So, yeah, if I could be the one who's by books, audios, comics, and I don't just necessarily just always want to write kids stuff, but stuff that that will get them excited and get them to stay as well. One thing I would love to do, and I'm sort of trying to do it with some of the stuff I'm doing, is to create characters that we can see as young people who we can then see grow. I suppose in a very similar way to actually we're seeing our heroes in things like Star Wars and Star Trek now growing older, which you didn't used to get in a lot of your media. We now have that period when we have these franchises that have been going 20 years. So you can have Patrick Stewart returning as Picard, as an old man. You can have old man Luke. You can have Kurt really starting to worry about growing old. You can have Han Solo
instigate the cheers in the theater.
Yes. And you can have Han, someone I grew up loving, who is now a dad and copes with the problems that I am. I cope with being a dad and the worries I have. I'd love, to have there's kids, the characters that kids read when they're a kid, and then they grow with them, so they start seeing them, start off as a Padawan and becoming a Jedi and end up being, well, they'll be dead. But that's not the point. What I mean? Characters that can grow with them and get them excited.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're definitely doing that now. I mean, I would guarantee that there's a kid that picked up your book and discovered who Jackson was just like you did when you were a kid because of you. Like, that is without a doubt is happening. So
what I want is 30 years time when there's another, whatever Star Wars has become in 30 years time, that there'll be a writer sitting there going and they say, do you want to write the first Jackson story in new canon? And they'll say, yes.
Yes, it's my turn.
Yeah.
I shall make him back, and I shall make him just as annoying as he ever was.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. Now, as we're wrapping up here, Cavan, I wanted to kind of give you the floor. If there's anything else you want to either tell people where to find you, anything else you're excited about coming up, the floor is yours without us hampering you with questions.
Thank you very much. Well, you can find me at my website, which is cavanscott.com, or on Twitter. I'm on Twitter far too much, at Cavan Scott. What am I excited about? Well, I say I'm Project Luminous. I'm incredibly excited about, but can't tell you anything about it. Return to Vader's Castle, which comes out in October. I'm working on at the minute as well, which is the sequel to last year's Vader's Castle miniseries we did over at Halloween. We're working on that in the minute, and there's some very exciting stuff happening with that. But obviously, I can't tell you anything about it. But those are the, at the minute that's sort of taking up my time at the minute. And all I would say I realize how annoying it must be with us teasing Luminous, but stick with us and keep listening because more news is coming soon.
Oh yeah, and never stop teasing us about Luminous. Anytime that those 2 words, I mean, you're right, the 2 words, they pop up and the ears just prick up, the spine gets a little tingly because we know something's coming. So we love it.
I like it. They do it with the films all the time. It's nice to get it with the expanded universe stuff, personally.
Yeah. And also, I would say go back and read Master and an Apprentice every line and try and work out things. And listen to Dooku, because there are things in there.
Well, you don't have to twist my arm to reread a Claudia Gray novel, I'll tell you that. So I think it's something I could do.
No, there are worse things. Like, go and read a good novel by someone who's brilliant. No.
Oh, gosh, if I have to, man.
Exactly. Well, I think after all that, that'll do it for this week's episode of Living Force. Cavan, thank you so much for this conversation, for coming on, for all the work that you've put in and will still be putting in that you can't talk about at all. We're all very excited. Brilliant. Yes. Well, thanks for having me on. It's been amazing. Fantastic. So to our audience, we hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts and tune in every week to hear mostly me, Corey, and Charles, but sometimes people like Mr. Cavan Scott talk about the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Please go ahead, leave us a review to help people find us, and head over to utini.com where we have reviews, articles, and comprehensive book profiles all about Kevin's work as well, but also all the other stories in the Star Wars galaxy. Now, obviously, we ran out of time today, but if you want your thoughts on the show, go ahead, email us at livingforcepod@utini.com, tweet at us at livingforcepod, or join our Utini Discord community by going to utini.com/discord. You can find us individually on Twitter at Eric Eilerson, Corey is at Doc Star Wars MD, Charles is at C. Hankel, and Cavan again is at Cavan Scott. Special thank you to Matt Davenport, our amazing editor, Freddie, who's our tech guy, and Wes, our community manager. Corey, Charles, and Cavan, thanks guys for being here. Thanks to you all for listening. And of course, may the Force be with you.
Bloop, blappity, bloop.
There is no hatred. There is joy. There is no division. There is union. There is no apathy. There is passion. There is no gatekeeping. There is community. This is the Utini Star Wars Fan Code. Embrace it, live by it, and above all, trust in the living force. That's all for this week. Join our community and surround yourself with like-minded fans by visiting us online at utini.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you.